Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley. As always, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your listenership, and I'm just really happy you're here today. I hope you are having a phenomenal finish to your summer. I am actually recording this just before I am heading into the backcountry of Wyoming with my family for a week. So I will be completely off radar, which really feels actually kind of stressful because I have so much going on right now. And it also makes it totally perfect because I definitely need the break. And I know that everything I have to do will be waiting for me when I get home. So whatever you're doing to wrap up the summer, I hope it is awesome and I hope it is restorative. Now, before I get into today's episode, I want to remind you that we have our free 5 to Thrive event coming up. It's a free online event that happens starting September 4th. And you can register for that event by going to graceandgrit.com/5 to Thrive. Again, graceandgrit.com/5 to Thrive. You'll just have to enter your name and email, and then we will send you all the juicy details on how to participate in that event. What is the event? It's an event dedicated to helping women unravel the stress in their life in really simple ways. So we talk about, of course, lifestyle habits that, most of you have heard before, but I give you ways to break it down really simply, and also to really understand sort of chemically and biologically why these things are so important. So I hope you will join me for that event. The theme on the podcast this month has been principles of deep health. And it has been so much fun to put together. I know I say this about every theme, that it's near and dear to my heart. But really, I feel like principles of deep health are the root of the work that I teach. And you'll see, I've said that before about self-leadership, but today I'm going to talk about how I think self-leadership is one of the primary principles of deep health. So you're going to see how all that kind of fits together. If you have missed the 3 prior episodes that we've done in this series, I just want to remind you that you can still, of course, check them out on iTunes or on my website. They're always available. But we also have put together a free roadmap for you that you can download and get all of our notes and some personal notes from me and just some of the key takeaways if you don't have time to go back and listen, or if you have listened and you really just want to have some simple reminders about all the things we've talked about. You can go to graceandgrit.com/deep health to get access to that roadmap. If you have already registered for roadmaps in the past, you don't need to do that. We will send you the free roadmap as of Monday next week. So you don't have to worry about that at all. We'll get that to you, no problem. And today, we are going to talk about self-leadership as one of the primary principles of deep health. Doesn't that sound fun? It will be fun. We'll make it fun. We preach the importance to our children about sort of the importance of learning how to think for themselves, right? We want them to be self-directed. There's a part of us that believes that's such a valuable part of adulthood, being able to think for yourself, which is interesting because what I see happening in the diet industry and the diet culture is so the opposite. Most adults who are looking to improve their health don't necessarily want to think for themselves, especially when it comes to health. So they end up buying into all these protocols and systems. And worse yet, diets, of course, approach health as something to be remedied simply by diet and exercise alone. And I hope that if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you know that I believe health is so much bigger than diet and exercise. Health is multifaceted, right? We aren't just a body. We also have this amazing brain and this soul. Like there's so much to us that makes us so unique and so incredible. And in my opinion, health is really a practice of learning how to manage stressors. All the things in your life that act as stressors on your life. So when I talk about stressors, I'm talking about psychological stressors, physical stressors, chemical stressors, environmental stressors, habitual pattern stressors. There's a lot of different types of stressors that influence our health. And your stressors are very different from my stressors. So why in the world are we buying into these one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter programs that completely dismiss our uniqueness? Now, of course, this whole month we are talking about deep health. So I just want to speak to this concept of deep health for those of you who may just be tuning in for the first time. Deep health isn't a destination. It is not a finish line to cross. Deep health is a practice that you commit to for the rest of your life. And it doesn't always look the same. The practice doesn't always look the same because life is forever changing. Nature is constantly changing. And you, my friend, are a part of nature. What worked for you to create a great state of health in your 20s, if you even experienced a great state of health in your 20s, very well may not be the same work that you need to do in your 40s and 50s. I mean, what you even did to take excellent care of yourself even 6 months ago may not work for you now. Deep health is really an invitation to get to know yourself and evolve yourself at every age and stage of life, which isn't possible if you are rigidly attached to following a list of rules and regulations or only equate health with a number on the scale or a clothing size. Deep health is achieved by having a deep and intimate relationship with yourself. A relationship that includes curiosity about what nourishes you and what depletes you, curiosity about what drives you, and why you do what you do. Deep health requires trust that you are smart enough, capable enough, that you actually know enough to start right now. And that you are the only person who is ever really capable of making the best decision for yourself. Deep health requires that you start trusting that you're not broken. There's a difference between taking better care of yourself because you think you're broken versus taking better care of yourself because you think you're awesome and you want to be a fully expressed human. You want the world to fully experience your awesomeness. And you can only do that if you're well taken care of. Deep health requires deep honesty. Again, about what you're doing and why you're really doing it. I know I say that every episode, but I can't say it enough. Deep health requires a ton of communication. And here's the bummer, right? Deep health isn't a quick fix. It isn't sexy. It isn't something that we can capture in a photo on Instagram. Deep health, in my humble opinion, is only possible to the extent that you are willing to go in and get to know yourself and the capacity that you have to lead yourself. And so today I want to talk about self-leadership Now, I did a whole theme on self-leadership back in April. So if you would like to dive deeper into self-leadership, which is one of my favorite conversations, I would really recommend that you go back to the archives of the podcast and look for the self-leadership episodes. And I always break self-leadership down into 6 primary pieces, and I'll speak a little bit to each one today. But I dedicated entire episodes to each one of these topics back in April. Now, the 6 topics to self-leadership is number 1, self-respect. And yes, I do believe these are in order of importance. Self-respect being the most important. Self-awareness. Self-development. Self-management, self-compassion, and self-discipline. So let's just dive into each one a little bit today. Because again, I so strongly believe that self-leadership is one of the linchpins to deep health, to creating a state of deep health. And these 6 things that I'm going to talk about right now are what make up self-leadership. So self-respect. Self-respect means trusting yourself and having confidence that the decisions you make are the right decisions for you. If you lack self-respect, you will easily be swayed by the influence of others and disregard your own knowing about what needs to be done, which really ultimately leads you further and further away from yourself. Self-respect allows you to move more easily into setting boundaries. It allows you to say no to things that deplete you. And it also grants you the confidence to ask for what you need from others. In other words, it allows you to advocate for yourself. When you develop a really healthy dose of self-respect, which I'm going to say here and now, I believe is severely lacking in the women's health conversation. And many of you have heard me talk about this. We kind of inundated with this message that it's all about self-love. And I disagree with that very strongly because I think it's just a ridiculous ask for a woman who's been self-loathing for years or decades or her entire life to all of a sudden start loving herself. Self-respect is the entry, though, to self-love. So sure, self-love is the ultimate goal, but we've got to start with a smaller bite than that, and self-respect is that smaller bite. And when you develop a healthy dose of self-respect, you will be far less likely to compare yourself to other people. You'll be less likely to spend time doing things that don't serve you, and you'll spend a lot less time seeking the approval of other people. And I'm not saying that you'll never do these things, but you'll have a much lower tolerance for them. All right, the second element of self-leadership, which again is a very, very, very important part of this deep health conversation, is self-awareness. And the definition of self-awareness is conscious knowledge of one's own character, feelings, motives, and desires. And why is this important to self-leadership and ultimately to create deep health? Because when you have a better understanding of yourself, you can more easily direct yourself towards becoming the type of person you want to become. And when you become more self-aware, you're empowered, right, to make changes and to fortify your areas of strength and develop the areas that are weaker. So it's kind of like building muscle. When you haven't been working out for a while, you haven't been doing anything to honor the physicality of your body, and you go to a class or you go work with a trainer, you make some pretty big recognitions in that session, right? You're very aware of some of the muscles that haven't been trained in a while. And that's what self-awareness does. It just shows us the muscles that we haven't been using for a while. And I'm using muscles as an analogy, right? But self-awareness shows us where the gaps are. It shows us where we need to put a little bit more attention. And your ego will hate self-awareness. And this is why a lot of people don't do it. They aren't self-aware. It's better for them to live their life overscheduled and just reacting to everything around them and never taking time for introspection, because self-awareness is not always fun. Because it's literally a practice of acknowledging what we're doing that's serving us and what we're doing that isn't. So we can't improve ourselves really without self-awareness. So once we develop some self-awareness, we lean into self-development. Self-awareness shows us where the gaps are, and self-development helps to identify what we need to do in order to fill those gaps. So we start building skills to fill the gaps between where we currently are and where we ultimately want to be. So if we identify that we're super reactionary around food, and that's caused a lot of negative consequences in our life because we're just not feeling great, we lack confidence, our body isn't showing up to support us and all the things that we want to be taking on in our life. Maybe we identify that, we need help around food and how to heal our relationship with food and get more organized around food. That's self-development. It's like going to that class or hiring that trainer. Sometimes self-development looks like having accountability to moving our body every day, which those things can really help us with. Oftentimes, self-development will look like just learning strategies for better managing your stress, right? The next layer of self-leadership is self-management. So we started with self-respect. We started to become self-aware. We identified the gaps, which is where we start getting clear on what needs to be developed, which is self-development. And what happens when you start identifying gaps and start leaning into the work that needs to be done to fill those gaps, a lot of emotion starts to show up, right? When you commit to change, when you commit to changing something in your life, right? Improving some area of your life, you will have to rumble with a lot of difficult emotions that will arise when you start doing the work. You'll get frustrated. You might get disappointed. You might start telling yourself a lot of stories about, things from the past. So self-management is really learning how to manage your emotions, learning how to manage your thoughts. This is a lot of the work that I do with my clients. Learning how to better manage our energy, and even things like learning how to manage our schedules. So self-management, there's a lot of pieces to self-management. But if we don't manage our emotions and we don't manage our thoughts and we don't manage our energy and we refuse to manage our schedules, that self-development piece will never really get us anywhere. Because we have great intentions, we've identified what needs to be done, but if we're not self-managing, we're never going to show up to do the work. So I love the conversation of self-management. I think it's so fun to explore with people why they're resisting, why they're sort of putting something on their schedule, but then negotiating their way out of it. I don't know why that work lights me up, but it always has. And I just love helping clients to start following through with more consistency. So once we've developed some skill around self-management, the next layers, which is all, of course, these are all interlinked, right? But the final two layers of this self-leadership model are self-compassion and self-discipline. And I've done a lot of podcasts on these two topics, self-compassion and self-discipline, which really is grace and grit, right? It's the name of my company because of these two qualities and skill sets are really everything when it comes to creating change in our life. And why? Well, self-compassion allows us to identify gaps through self-awareness without judgment. So we don't beat ourselves up. We don't make ourselves feel terrible. We just see the gaps. We have compassion for ourselves and we move forward. That's very powerful. But a lot of people without self-compassion will never move forward because they're too busy making themselves feel really terrible about the gaps that they see. And that's just not helpful. There's nothing useful about that. Self-compassion also kind of creates this willingness in us to get in the arena with new skills and kind of be a beginner at learning some new behaviors without beating ourselves up when we take a side step or when we fall or when we, make a few mistakes. We just recognize when we have self-compassion that that's a part of the learning process. It's a part of growth. Self-compassion is also giving ourselves permission, right, to rest and recover when we have worked hard. And of course, I've done 1,000, and it feels like 1,000 episodes on the importance of rest and recovery. Rest and recovery. If you expect your body to perform at a higher level for you, you need to honor that your body will need to rest more. That is a part of self-compassion. Self-compassion is very much tied to self-forgiveness and hugely tied to gratitude. You've heard me talk about this a lot. We love, women are really good at identifying everything that's wrong with their body. And they literally try to hate their way healthy, which will never work. But gratitude, when we start looking for all that our body is doing well and how awesome our body is at allowing us to do the things in our life that are really important to our legacy, it gets a lot easier to show up and take care of ourselves because we realize the cost if we don't take care of these amazing vessels we've been gifted with. So gratitude is a massive part of self-compassion. And just like self-respect, I believe, is the gateway to self-love, I really do believe that gratitude is the gateway to self-compassion. What is your body doing awesomely well right now? What can you focus on that is brilliant and spectacular and perfect about your body right now? The fact that you're listening to the podcast, pretty freaking awesome and perfect. Something to think about. Self-discipline, right? A lot of people look at the sort of the spectrum. Self-compassion is at one end and self-discipline is at the other. I don't recommend that you live at either end of the spectrum. Just having self-compassion all the time and never showing up to do work, right? I've seen women use self-compassion as rationalization for never doing any work. That is not healthy. That is never going to create a state of deep health for you. Just like going at the other end of the spectrum to self-discipline and using self-discipline as a form of self-abuse is never going to be a healthy choice. I always feel like it's important to remind listeners of this, that when I talk about self-discipline, I'm talking about the self-discipline that is born out of self-respect, not out of self-loathing, not out of hating yourself, but of respecting and appreciating and maybe even loving yourself so deeply that you're willing to do work to take care of yourself. That's the kind of self-discipline I promote. So you can't just live in self-compassion. You can't just live in self-discipline. There is that really sweet center where you will flourish. And only you can decide where that is. And only you can answer the question, is this a matter of needing more discipline or more compassion? I can't answer that for you. Nobody can answer that for you. Only you know that truth. But self-discipline is really recognizing that there is work to be done to move your life to higher ground out of the respect that you have for yourself in your life. And you are committed to doing that work. So self-discipline is showing up day after day after day, regardless of how you feel about the work. Because I always joke that how you feel about the work is a lot like the weather in Montana. It changes every 5 minutes. So just move forward, regardless of how you feel, because you pre-decided that working out or eating a healthy dinner or taking that walk with your friend or going on that trip was in dedication to the respect that you have for yourself, the respect that you have for your health, the respect that you have for your life. So don't question it in the moment. Follow through with it. So that's just kind of a recap of that whole month that we did on self-leadership. But I just wanted to kind of bundle it all here in one episode because I am such a firm believer that these 6 qualities of self-leadership are so important when we're talking about deep health. And again, of course, this is all at the root of what I teach my clients. So self-leadership is very much, to me, one of the principles of deep health. Deep health is a journey of getting to know yourself and direct yourself. Nothing outside of you will fulfill you in the way that being the director of your own life will. I'm going to say that one more time because I believe this so heartily. Nothing outside of you will fulfill you in the way that being the director of your own life will. And this is why I speak about self-leadership so much, especially in the health arena. The diets and the extreme measures are not allowing you to be the director of your own life. Nobody is ever going to know your body and the state of your physical and mental well-being like you do. So we have to start learning how to take initiative every day for the rest of our life around our health and around our self-care. All right, I'm going to leave you with that today, but I just want to remind you one more time about 2 free offers. We have the free 5 to Thrive event coming up September 4th, which is a free online event. It runs for 5 days. It's all about kind of the basic tenets of healthy living and simple measures that you can take to start getting traction with your health. And that, like I said, it starts September 4th. You can register for it by going to graceandgrit.com/5 to Thrive. And the second freebie that I just want to remind you about is this whole theme that we've been on all month, Principles of Deep Health. We have an awesome free roadmap that you can download by going to graceandgrit.com/deep health. So if you want both, if you only want one, if you've already registered for the roadmap, remember you don't need to register again. You will get all future roadmaps once you register for one. But you are only going to be a part of the 5 to Thrive event if you register for it, because I don't want to send people stuff they don't want. So there's that. All right, my friends. I hope this was helpful. I hope there was an aha moment in there somewhere. I hope there was maybe a little perspective shift, or maybe even just a little weight off because you started to look at something a little differently. I always love hearing your feedback. Courtney@graceandgrit.com. I hope you have a fantastic week. And I will be back next week to talk about the final principle in this series, the principles of deep health. The last principle that I'm going to talk about next week is unconditional love. And I'm really excited about that conversation. So I hope that you will come back and join me for that. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story, and it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort, and with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.